The medal he never got, and the home he never expected. For 4 long years he sat behind rusted bars, not barking, not begging, just waiting. At one point, Axel was a hero, a canine trained to detect danger, protect lives, and face gunfire if he had to. But heroes don't always get happy endings. When his unit disbanded, there was no parade, no goodbye, just a cage. Each day, families passed his kennel, their eyes lit up at wagging puppies, tail-chasing fluff balls. But Axel, too big, too old, too quiet. He stopped lifting his head. Until one rainy afternoon, something changed. A couple stood in front of his cage. No high-pitched voices, no pointing, just stillness, and a scent lavender and leather, and something warm. They didn't walk away, and Axel dared to hope again. The blast wasn't loud, not the way movies make it seem. It was dull, muted by adrenaline and dust, a low, sickening whoomp that collapsed the world into silence. Axel felt the force before he heard it, a ripple of air and heat that surged through the alley, flinging metal shrapnel and grit through the dusk. His handler, Officer Thomas Rourke, had shouted something a split second before, but Axel didn't catch the word. He'd already launched forward, instinct overriding thought. The explosion tore through the dumpster beside them. Thomas hit the ground with a grunt. Axel, mid-leap, twisted in the air and collided with his handler's chest. Pain bloomed across his side, sharp and biting, like fire underneath the skin. But he didn't make a sound. Canines were trained not to. His body went limp over Thomas, shielding the man's ribs with his own, the way they'd rehearsed 100 times. Only this time, there were no rubber bullets, no trainers shouting, "Good boy," no reward tucked into a uniform pocket. There was only smoke and blood. Hours later, or maybe it was minutes, Axel couldn't tell, he awoke in the back of a police cruiser, belly wrapped in gauze, sirens whining in the distance. Thomas sat beside him, one hand on Axel's neck, the other wiping his face. There was a tremble in the man's fingertips. It wasn't from fear. It was something heavier. Axel's recovery was fast, physically. German shepherds, especially those bred for canine service, were built for resilience. But something inside him had shifted after that mission. A slow, quiet unraveling of the bond he thought was unbreakable. They didn't take him back to the station. No parade, no ceremony, just a silent ride to a concrete building 2 towns away. Eastway County Animal Control Intake Facility. "We just need a place for him to rest while we sort out the paperwork," the officer said as he handed over Axel's leash. The woman behind the counter, with tired eyes and coffee breath, nodded without looking up. "Kennel 27, same one as that lab from the 7th Precinct." No one said, "Thank you." No one said goodbye. Thomas patted Axel's head once, gently, absently, and whispered something into his ear. It was barely audible, muffled by the sudden echo of barking behind the metal door. Axel didn't understand the words, but he recognized the finality. Kennel 27 smelled like bleach and rust. The floor was cold, even through the thin towel they'd laid down. A stainless steel bowl of dry kibble sat untouched in the corner. The barking never stopped, constant, chaotic, a background track of desperation and confusion. Axel paced once, turned twice, then lay down, head between his front paws, ears twitching at the unfamiliar chorus of abandonment. He didn't know it then, but that would become his world for the next 1,478 days. Time has a strange way of bending in captivity. At first, Axel counted meals, footsteps, the rotation of the janitorial shift. But eventually, even those patterns lost meaning. Faces changed. The smell of antiseptic stayed. Sometimes a volunteer would stop and murmur, "Good boy," through the bars. But the tone was always distracted, like they were saying it more for themselves than for him. He learned not to respond, because responding meant hoping, and hope had teeth sharper than any bite he'd ever delivered on command. Every few weeks, a new family would walk past, parents, children, people with bright eyes and camera phones. They never stopped for him. Their eyes skimmed over his scarred flank, his lowered tail, the stillness in his posture. He wasn't the image of a good dog they came to find. He was too big, too old, too wary. The puppies always went first, bouncing, yapping, tumbling over their own paws. Axel watched them leave, one by one, tails wagging, unaware of the weight they hadn't yet learned to carry. He stopped pressing his nose to the bars, stopped perking his ears when the latch clicked. The part of him that once scanned doorways and shadows for danger now stared blankly at the peeling corner of the kennel wall. He was no longer a dog on duty. He was no longer anyone at all. What hurt the most wasn't the pain in his hip when the nights turned cold. It was the fading, the slow erosion of everything that made him who he was, his training, his pride. The way his name, Axel, used to command attention, respect, even admiration. Now it was just a label on a clipboard. Male, approx. 9 mouillards, GSD, semi-retired, behavioral sensitivity. They had reduced his life to a checklist. They had called his loyalty a liability. Still, on the fourth spring, something shifted. It was a smell. Not bleach, not kibble, not wet fur or steel, something softer. Lavender. 4 years had passed. Not in seasons, not in birthdays, not even in the gray that now dusted Axel's muzzle like ash from a long, cold fire. Time in the shelter moved differently. It dripped. Not in hours, but in echoes, footsteps in the hallway, the jangle of keys, the high-pitched whine of puppies being carried away. For Axel, life had flattened into a series of sounds, barking, doors latching, voices fading, then silence. He had once counted the number of dogs that came and went. At first, it was an instinct pattern recognition from his years of training. Puppies came in batches, trembling in corners, but they didn't stay long. They were scooped up quickly, often within days. Little tails wagging, names picked by children with sticker-covered notebooks, paper tags replaced with collars, and new beginnings. Axel watched them leave, always. Some of the younger adult dogs took longer. People would pause, read the notes on the clipboard, peer into the kennel, then smile. Sometimes they'd reach in, sometimes they'd kneel down. Sometimes they'd even say, "He's perfect." But no one ever said that about Axel. He was the dog in Kennel 27, the big one, the quiet one, the one with the scar near his rib cage and the look that made people uncomfortable, not aggressive, just tired. Tired in a way only the broken recognize. He had stopped trying long ago. There was a time when the sound of footsteps had stirred him. He used to rise, ears forward, tail lifting ever so slightly, just in case. He had learned that hope was dangerous. Hope meant standing, and standing meant falling harder when they didn't stop, or worse, when they stopped and then moved on. So now, when people came, He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't lift his head from his paws. The less he tried, the less it hurt. Even the workers had started to forget he was there. They came on rotation. Clean the floor, refresh the water, drop in the food, no eye contact, no extra words, sometimes a pat behind the ears if they weren't in a rush. But mostly, Axel was just another kennel to check off the list. The floor was always cold, the kind of cold that seeped into the bone. He had a blanket once thin and threadbare, but it had been soiled and taken away. No one replaced it. His food bowl was filled like clockwork, but the kibble was dry, tasteless. He ate only when no one was looking. Some days, he skipped meals altogether, not out of protest, but because chewing felt like effort. Drinking water had become a ritual of silence. Head low, tongue slow, ears pinned not for caution, but to shrink himself, to disappear. Around him, the shelter roared. Puppies yelped in excitement. Adolescent dogs paced and barked for attention. The new arrivals howled their confusion. Their voices echoed down the narrow concrete hallway like an orchestra of desperation. But Axel didn't join. He had learned that noise doesn't bring people closer. It just makes them walk faster. Occasionally, a child would point through the bars and say, "That one's big." Their parents would glance, frown, and tug them toward the golden retrievers and beagles. "Let's look at the friendly ones," they'd say. Axel wasn't angry. He didn't hate them. He didn't feel much of anything anymore. That was the worst part. Not the abandonment, not the pain, not even the scar, but the numbness, the fact that each day felt the same as the last, and worse, that it no longer felt strange. At night, the barking would fade. The shelter would hum in fluorescent stillness, the buzz of lights overhead the only reminder that time hadn't frozen. That this wasn't some limbo where forgotten souls went to wait for something that might never come. Axel would lie curled in the same corner, not because it was comfortable, but because it was predictable. Predictability was a kind of mercy. And in those quiet hours, his mind would wander just briefly back to what was, back to the feel of a Kevlar vest brushing against his side, back to the sound of boots crunching gravel as he and his handler cleared a perimeter, back to the single word Axel spoken like it meant something. It was easier not to remember. But some nights, the memories came anyway. And when they did, Axel would press his face against the bars, not to see, but to hide the tremble in his nose. Once during a rare storm, the power flickered. The hallway lights blinked out. In the brief darkness, Axel thought just for a moment that maybe someone had come for him, that maybe, finally, someone remembered. But it wasn't for him. It never was. Then, one afternoon, gray skies, damp air, the smell of fresh bleach and wet fur, something shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even dramatic, just a moment, a presence, and then a scent. Not of dog, not of kibble, not of disinfectant or rubber gloves, but something warm, soft, lavender and vanilla and rain. Axel's ears twitched. Two figures stood at the far end of the hallway, not moving, not talking, just watching. And for the first time in years, Axel lifted his head. Rain had a sound that muted everything. It softened the barking, drowned the distant hum of traffic, blurred the edges of time. On that particular afternoon, it fell steady against the tin roof of the shelter, tapping out a rhythm that only Axel seemed to notice. The others barked at nothing, at the door creaking, at shadows, at the storm itself. But Axel remained still, curled in his usual corner, his back to the world, until he smelled it. Not disinfectant, not rust, Not fear or sickness or the harsh tang of bleach. Lavender. And something else beneath it. Something warm, alive, human. His nose twitched. Subtly. Reflexively. It had been so long since anything new entered that hallway. New smells, new energy. Everything here was recycled. Sorrow in circles, feet in loops, hearts in holding patterns. But this scent was different. He opened one eye, and there they were, a man and a woman, standing just beyond the bars, not moving, not talking, just being there. They weren't loud. They didn't crouch down and slap the floor like so many others had. They didn't call his name, didn't rattle the cage, didn't point and laugh or talk too loudly to a shelter worker trying to pretend none of this broke her. They just looked at him. And they didn't look away. Axel didn't get up. He'd learned what attention meant. Usually it was momentary curious glances, hesitant admiration that vanished as soon as someone noticed his age, his stillness, the warning label on the clipboard outside his cage. But these two didn't glance and go. They lingered. The woman was the source of the lavender. He was sure of it now. She wore a long gray coat, rain clinging to the sleeves, darkening the fabric. Her hands were tucked into her pockets, but her eyes were the first soft thing he'd seen in years. The man stood beside her, taller, broad-shouldered, hands calloused, one of them gripping a folded paper like he wasn't sure whether to crumple it or present it. They both looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from poor sleep, but the kind that lives deep in the bones. The kind Axel understood. He lifted his head, just slightly. The movement was slow, unsure-like, testing the weight of the air. The woman's eyes met his. She didn't smile. Not yet. But her shoulders relaxed just a bit, as if the smallest lift of his head had said something she'd been hoping to hear. The man whispered something, not loud enough for Axel to catch. But the shelter worker behind them nodded. Keys jingled. Axel didn't move when the latch clicked. He'd heard that sound before. It meant nothing. Usually a cleaning, a cage check, a quick walk before being put right back where he started. But this time, the leash wasn't clipped roughly under the chin. It came gently, slowly. No pulling, no forcing. And then a word, soft, unhurried. Axel. His ears flicked at the sound. It was strange to hear his name said like that, not barked through a megaphone, not shouted over gunfire or sirens, just spoken, as if it meant something again. The door creaked open. Rain-wet air drifted in from the front of the shelter. It curled into the hallway like an invitation. Cool, clean, real. The man knelt beside him. He didn't reach out, didn't touch, just waited, his voice low. "We don't have to rush, but you don't belong in here anymore." Axel blinked. So many hands had passed him by, some cruel, some careless, some trying to help but unsure how. But this man, this voice, this presence didn't want anything from him. It just waited. Slowly, Axel stood. His joints were stiff. His paws scraped slightly against the concrete. The movement wasn't graceful, but it was deliberate. The woman stepped closer, crouching now, still careful to leave space. Her coat smelled of soap, fabric, and rain. She extended a hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. Axel sniffed the air between them. Then, after a pause, the edge of her sleeve. Lavender. And something else. Hope? Her voice barely broke a whisper. "You can come home now." That word again. Home. It stirred something buried deep beneath the cold layers of waiting and giving up. Something like memory. Something like longing. The leash clicked into place. But this time, it didn't feel like a tether. It felt like a bridge. The shelter worker stepped back. The door swung open wider, and Axel stepped out of Kennel 27, not with energy, not with joy, but with caution born of survival. As he passed the other cages, the dogs erupted, some barking wildly, others falling silent. A few watched him go, eyes wide, as if witnessing something rare. Because it was rare. Most didn't leave here. Not after 4 years. At the front desk, the woman signed a stack of papers. Her hands trembled once, but she kept going. The man stood beside Axel, his hand resting gently on the dog's back, grounding them both. "He's really coming with us," the woman said quietly, as if the words might disappear if spoken too loud. "Yeah," the man replied. "He is." The doors slid open. The world outside hit like a wave. Axel squinted against the brightness gray skies still poured, but after the fluorescent tomb of the shelter, even dull daylight felt blinding. The leash went slack in the man's hand. The woman walked a few steps ahead, then turned. "We'll go slow," she said. Axel looked up once more, then followed. The leash clicked into place with the same sound it always had, a small metallic snick barely louder than a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the fog of routine that had wrapped around Axel like a second skin. He didn't flinch. He didn't move, because he'd heard that sound before, too many times. The worker stood beside him, one hand steady on the nylon leash, the other resting gently on Axel's shoulder. It wasn't the usual tech. This one was older, slower. Her name tag read Mara, and her eyes didn't look away when Axel turned to glance at her. She didn't pull, didn't hurry him. She knew what this looked like for dogs like him, the ones that weren't chosen until they had stopped expecting to be. Axel shifted his weight, not toward her, not toward the door, just inward, protecting the soft places. He had been taken out of the kennel before, for baths, for meet and greets that ended with polite apologies. Once, for a vet check where a needle missed its mark and left his leg aching for days. Each time he had allowed it, not because he trusted, but because he was trained. And each time, they brought him back. Same cage, same floor, same silence. That had been the cruelest part. The return, not the removal. Hope was a fragile thing. It didn't shatter like glass. It wore down like rope. Axel had long since stopped tugging on it. But this time was different. Not because of the sound, not because of the leash, but because of the pause. Because no one was rushing. Because no one was smiling with that pity-laced curve of the mouth that said, "He's sweet, but..." Because when he turned his head slowly, cautiously, he didn't see a clipboard or a kennel chart. He saw them, the man and the woman, still there, still watching, still waiting. Mara gave the leash a gentle slack, letting it hang loosely between her hand and his collar. "You ready, big guy?" she murmured. Axel didn't answer. He never did. But his pause shifted slightly, just enough for his body to square toward the front of the kennel. Not a step, just a change in direction. The smallest movement that meant the largest thing. Mara smiled, but didn't say anything more. She knew. Sometimes progress was measured in the absence of resistance. The door creaked open. It wasn't loud, but in Axel's ears, it was everything. It was the threshold, the invisible line between confinement and uncertainty. His ears twitched. His body stayed still. The man, Evan, took a quiet step forward. His shoes scuffed lightly on the concrete, no heavy tread, no sudden movement. Axel didn't look directly at him, but he heard it. The tone, the patience. "You don't have to hurry," Evan said, his voice calm, low, like something out of Axel's memory. "We're just here to walk with you." That word again. With. Not at, not for. With. It lingered like a breath in the air, and slowly, so slowly, it reached him. Axel's front paw lifted, then set down again. Another followed. He stepped through the kennel door, not with confidence, but without collapse. And that, after 4 years, was a miracle. As he moved into the corridor, the rest of the shelter stirred around him. Dogs barked, whined, scrambled to the edges of their cages. Some wagged furiously, others jumped, confused by the disruption in their predictable world. Axel didn't react. He walked, straight ahead, eyes forward. Ears tilted just enough to track sound, but not enough to reveal fear. That was still muscle memory, discipline. What remained of his training after everything else had eroded. But inside? Inside, the cracks ran deep. Evan and Riley stayed back, giving Axel space as Mara led him down the row of kennels, but not too far. They walked with him, quietly, reverently. The door to the front lobby came into view. Glass, light, movement. Axel slowed, not out of fear, but habit, because that's where the leash usually turned around, where hope became hallway again. But Mara didn't turn him. She pushed the door open, and the air shifted. Cold and rain-sweet, it brushed against his face like something he hadn't felt in years' weather. Real weather, not filtered air or damp shelter humidity, but the smell of outside, of wet concrete, trees, cars, sky. Freedom had a scent, and it was no longer a memory. Riley stepped forward, her coat still damp, raindrops beading at the collar. She didn't crouch this time. She simply stood, just to the side, her eyes never breaking from his. "You don't have to be ready," she whispered. "You just have to come with us." Mara knelt and slowly passed the leash from her hand to Evan's. Axel looked up, not at the leash, but at the transfer itself. The movement meant something, something final. He was no longer tethered to the place behind him. What lay ahead was unknown, but it was forward. The leash in Evan's hand tightened slightly, not pulling, just steadying. "Let's go home," he said, and this time Axel moved first. Axel had walked this hallway hundreds of times, but never like this. Never with a leash that didn't snap back. Never with a door at the end that stayed open. Never with eyes watching, not because they pitied him, but because they didn't understand how he was the one leaving. The corridor stretched before him like a tunnel of memory. Rows of kennels lined both sides, cages filled with motion fur and teeth and need pressed against metal bars. The concrete beneath his paws was slick from mop water, but he stepped carefully, methodically, not rushing, not hesitating. His body was tense, not from fear, not exactly. It was the tension of a soldier in a battlefield long after the fighting had ended. A body that hasn't yet realized the war is over. The dogs noticed first. Axel didn't look at them, but he felt their reactions ripple like heat through the air. A golden retriever mix barked twice sharp, questioning. A puppy in the far cage let out a high-pitched whine. One of the older dogs, Bruno, a hound who'd come in just months after Axel stood up from his usual spot and stared, silent and still. And then, as Axel passed Bruno's kennel, it happened. Silence. One by one the other dogs quieted. Some turned their heads, some lowered themselves, ears flat, tails still, and some, just a few, watched him go like they understood. Axel didn't stop. He didn't dare. If he stopped, he might realize how much his legs were shaking, how his chest had tightened like a coiled spring, how every instinct screamed that this was another test, another cruel rehearsal for a future that never arrived. His nails clicked softly against the floor, each step echoing more loudly than the last. Behind him, Riley and Evan followed in calm cadence. No commands, no encouragement, no leash tension. Just presence. Just space. It wasn't a parade. It was a procession. A quiet, sacred walk through the graveyard of what used to be. Axel's tail stayed low, just brushing his hocks. His ears twitched constantly, sweeping like radar, but his eyes stayed forward, because what waited behind him he already knew by heart. It was what waited ahead that frightened him most. As he neared the final corner, the shelter hallway widened slightly. The reception desk came into view. The glass doors gleamed with rainlight, casting shimmering puddles across the tile. Beyond them, a parking lot, a curb, a gray sedan, a world. Open space, real sky, air that hadn't passed through a filter, and freedom terrifying in its possibility. Axel paused just before the lobby. Evan noticed, stopped beside him, didn't speak. Riley stepped forward a few paces, opened the glass door, then waited with her hand on the handle. No pressure, no coaxing. Axel looked at her, just once. Then looked past her. At the storm. The scent of petrichor rolled in wet concrete, earth, and the faint sweetness of dying summer grass. He took one step forward, then another. The tile turned to threshold, the threshold to open air. And Axel crossed it. The moment his paws hit the damp pavement outside, something shifted. His nose flared instinctively, drinking in scents far beyond the sterile world he had lived in. A passing car, the oil on the wind, a squirrel a block away. A memory of what it meant to smell the world again, not just exist in it. Behind him, he heard a soft gasp. Riley. She wasn't crying, but she wasn't far from it either. For the first time, Axel looked back. Not at the shelter, not at the rows of kennels or the steel doors, but at the dogs watching him from behind the glass. Bruno stood tall at the front of his kennel. His eyes met Axel's. There was no growl, no bark, just a stillness between them. And then Axel lowered his head, not in submission, but in something older, something like goodbye. Evan stepped forward. "Ready?" he asked. Axel didn't know, but he stepped forward anyway, not because he was certain, but because this time no one was pulling him. The rain had eased to a mist. It didn't fall in sheets now. It drifted, soft and clinging, like a memory that refused to let go. Axel stood on the pavement, the sky above a pale curtain of gray. His fur was damp, darkened at the tips, but he didn't shake it off. He was still. The leash in Evan's hand hung loose, slack, a quiet promise that control wasn't the point, that trust, however fragile, was all that mattered now. Riley moved ahead, unlocking the car with a beep that barely registered in Axel's ears. The sound didn't startle him, not anymore. It was the silence that followed that made him hesitate, because silence could mean safety, but it had also meant goodbye. The car door opened. The interior was clean, warm, upholstered in soft cloth, not wire grates or metal floors. A towel had been laid across the back seat, folded neatly like someone had prepared for rain. There were no crates, no cages, no restraints, just space and a choice. Axel stopped at the curb. His front paw hovered just above the car's threshold, uncertain, suspended in thought. He didn't tremble, but he didn't move either. His body was calm, but inside him something curled tight. The last time he had stepped into a vehicle, it was a patrol SUV. Sirens overhead, his vest strapped snug to his ribs, a handler at his side, purpose in his chest. The time before that, the final time, had been the ride to the shelter. A stranger drove. Thomas didn't speak. Axel had pressed his nose to the window, not understanding that he wasn't going back to the station. That the next time the car door opened, he'd be a number. A line on a form. Now here it was again. A car, an open door, and no command. Evan knelt beside him. He didn't tug the leash, didn't point, didn't coax with treats or click his tongue like the volunteers sometimes did with frightened dogs. He simply crouched and rested a hand on Axel's chest, just above the old scar. It wasn't inspection, it wasn't dominance, it was grounding. The man's hand was warm through the fur, steady and firm, and his voice, when it came, was softer than any Axel had ever been trained to respond to. "It's okay," Evan murmured. "You're not going back." Axel looked at him, truly looked. Not just a flick of the eye, but a full turn of the head. The first real eye contact he had made since stepping out of Kennel 27. And what he saw in Evan's expression was not control. It was invitation. The kind that asked, "Can you try?" Not, "Will you obey?" From the passenger side, Riley leaned down and whispered, "Let's go home." Her voice wasn't bright, not sing-song, not sugar-laced like the voices people used when they were afraid of scaring a dog away. It was quiet, sincere, weighted with something that felt earned. The word hung there, home-like. It had a scent, like Axel could almost chase it down if he just took one more step. He moved, not quickly, not with excitement, but with decision. His front paws touched the edge of the car floor, then his back legs followed. He didn't climb, he didn't jump. He didn't hesitate once the first paw landed. He simply entered. The towel on the seat shifted slightly under his weight. He turned in place once, twice, and then lowered himself slowly, chest to seat, head between his paws, not curled, not guarding, just resting. Riley exhaled, a breath caught somewhere between relief and awe. Evan stood slowly, closed the door with care, and slid into the driver's seat. The car was quiet. Rain tapped lightly on the windshield. The shelter behind them loomed in the rearview mirror, but Axel never looked back. He didn't know what would come next. He didn't understand the word adopted or forever. He didn't know that Riley had spent nights reading about trauma in retired K9s. Didn't know that Evan had spent 2 years missing the silence only a working dog could fill. He didn't know that a room with a dog bed waited for him, or that his new name would never be changed. Because to them, Axel was already perfect. All he knew was that no one was forcing him, and no one was letting him go. And for the first time in a long, long time, that was enough. The car slowed. Axel stirred from where he lay curled in the back seat, eyes opening just enough to track the shift in movement. Tires crunched gravel. A gentle incline. The faint sway of the vehicle as it turned off the main road. The engine gave one final hum, then stopped. Silence. Except not the kind he'd known behind bars, the kind filled with too much air and not enough meaning. This was different. This silence had birdsong stitched inside it, wind moving through tree limbs, the distant tick of a wind chime catching the breeze. Axel didn't lift his head just yet. He listened. Listened like his survival depended on it, because in the shelter the quiet could mean danger, and back when he wore a vest and answered to shouted commands, quiet had meant the moment just before things broke. The car door opened. A rush of cool air swept in, carrying scents he didn't have words for. Dirt, leaves, something floral, something baked, rain on wood, grass. Then Evan's voice, low and unhurried. "All right, buddy, let's try this." Axel shifted his paws, slowly rising. His body creaked with the kind of stiffness that comes from too many nights on concrete. But he didn't hesitate. Evan reached in and clipped the leash gently to his collar, not tight, just enough to guide. Then he stepped back. The door opened wider. Axel stood at the edge and saw it. Not a kennel, not another hallway, but a yard, not large, but alive. Muddy patches dotted the lawn from the rain, and small yellow flowers poked stubbornly through grass that hadn't been trimmed to perfection. A wooden fence wrapped around the space, tall and worn at the edges but whole. Axel didn't move, because beneath his paws wasn't tile or metal. It was soft, damp, uneven earth. His claws gripped it differently. It gave beneath his weight, forgiving. He blinked. Behind him, Riley stood with her arms crossed, watching, not waiting. Her face was unreadable, but her stance was patient. She knew this moment wasn't about arrival. It was about permission. Not from them, from him. Axel took one step, then stopped. The grass pressed between his toes, and the sensation shocked him. He looked down as if the ground might vanish. He wasn't sure what to do. Instinct said to test, to circle, to seek an exit. But there were no bars here, no lines painted on the floor, no scent of urine or bleach to mark his place. Just the faint hum of a wind chime, and the absence of walls. The leash tugged lightly, not a pull, just a suggestion. Evan stepped to his side and whispered, "Come on, let's get inside." They walked together across the yard, slow, uneven. Axel didn't explore. He scanned. His ears twitched, his nose stayed low. When they reached the steps leading up to the porch, he froze again. Wood. He had never walked on wood, Evan noticed. "Okay," he murmured. "Take your time." One step. The board groaned beneath his weight and Axel's head snapped around, alert, but Evan didn't react. He didn't jerk the leash or hurry him forward, so Axel stepped again and again, until finally he was standing at the threshold of the front door. The house was simple, the kind people called modest or lived in. Cream-colored siding, a porch swing, still wet from the rain, flower pots on either side of the door, one slightly tilted, dirt spilling out onto the steps. But it smelled like something rare. Normalcy. Axel inhaled, long, deep. It smelled like laundry soap and cedar, and a life that wasn't about waiting. Riley opened the door without a word. Inside was light soft and gold. No flickering fluorescence, no buzz. Just the warm glow of a lamp by the window, and the quiet hum of something cooking far off, maybe stew, maybe something sweeter. No barking, no crates, just a hallway, a rug, and a couch. Axel hesitated at the threshold, not because he was afraid, but because this felt like something that could break him, something so far removed from the world he knew that stepping into it felt dangerous. Because what if it wasn't real? What if the floor vanished? What if they changed their minds? But then Riley crouched low, one hand outstretched, but not reaching. "You're safe," she said. "There's no rush. But this is yours now." No demand, no command, just a statement, just truth. Axel stepped forward, into the house. His nails tapped lightly on the hardwood floor, and the sound echoed differently here. Not like cages, like footsteps. He paused halfway across the entryway, turning slightly to look back. Evan stood just outside, rain still misting behind him, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Axel had crossed the line, and for the first time in years, it wasn't into a cage. The house held its breath. Or maybe it was Axel. Standing just past the doorway, he didn't move. He let the scent of the place settle into his chest, soap, wood, something baking. Not sterile, not chemical, no bitter sting of cleaning fluid, no sweat or fur matted in two small cages, only the smell of a place that had already made space for him. His ears flicked forward, then back. The room was open but not vast. To his right, a short hallway curved into what looked like a kitchen. In front of him, a couch draped with a faded blanket, a coffee table cluttered with books, and a ceramic mug still half full. Nothing was new. Nothing pristine. The house didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't, and somehow that made Axel pause longer, because realness felt rare. To the left, tucked between the bookshelf and a window that spilled soft afternoon light across the floor, a dog bed, round, plush, faintly blue. Its cushion sagged slightly in the middle, like it had been tested by a hand or weight. But no other dog scent lingered there, just clean fabric and something faintly citrus Riley, maybe. It was clearly waiting, but not demanding. Axel took a few steps in, his nails tapping against the hardwood. He moved slow, head low, tail neutral, body language carefully measured, not because he was afraid, but because he was listening. To the room, to the silence, to the way nothing here asked him to perform. Riley remained a few feet away, seated on the floor now, legs crossed. She didn't look directly at him, only glanced softly when he passed, her hand resting gently on the floor beside her. "You can try it," she said, her voice quiet enough to be mistaken for thought. "It's yours." Not a command, just an offering. Axel approached the bed. He didn't sniff it right away. He stood beside it, eyes scanning the room again. Windows, walls, no gates, no surveillance cameras in the corners, no eyes behind two-way mirrors, just shelves stacked with books, a humming fish tank in the corner, and a man Evan leaning in the kitchen doorway, arms folded, watching but not interfering. Axel circled once. Not the bed, just the general space. His body moved from habit, the kind drilled into muscle memory. Secure your perimeter, mark the exits, clock the silence, and then, only then, he turned back to the bed. He didn't lie on it. Not yet. Instead, he folded his legs and lowered himself beside it. Not touching, just next to it, close enough to acknowledge its presence, far enough to maintain the barrier. Riley smiled, but didn't reach out. She shifted slightly so that her knees faced him, but her arms stayed still, loose across her lap. "You don't have to sleep in it," she murmured, "but it's soft, warmer than the floor." Axel blinked slowly. The floor was cool under his side, but not punishing. And here, no one had shouted at him for lying where he wasn't supposed to. So he stayed, not in the bed, but near it. And in this house that felt like a beginning. A bird called outside, somewhere in the trees. The wind tapped gently at the window pane. Axel didn't twitch, not because he trusted the sound, but because his body was too tired to brace against every unknown. Sometimes surrender looked like stillness. Evan walked quietly into the living room, carrying a folded towel. He placed it gently at the edge of the dog bed, not covering it, just adding to it, like layering care over care. Then he knelt, just once, lowered himself enough to be at Axel's eye level. "You don't owe us anything," he said, soft. "Not a wag, not a lick, not even sleep. Just breathe. That's enough." Axel didn't move. But inside, something loosened. The leash was still clipped to his collar. Riley hadn't removed it yet. But it didn't feel like a leash anymore. It felt like a line that could be let go. The light shifted in the room, afternoon turning to early evening. No alarms, no barking. No footsteps echoing down a corridor to interrupt the moment. Just breath and choice. Axel adjusted his head, lowering it to the floor beside the bed, not inside, but closer. He closed one eye, then the other, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't sleep out of exhaustion. He rested because no one was watching to see if he would. That night, the house dimmed, not into silence, but into something gentler. A kind of hush that came not from absence but from respect. No one flipped on harsh lights, no one filled the air with noise. The only sound was the soft rustle of blankets, the occasional creak of old floorboards adjusting to the cool air, and the low murmur of wind outside pressing against the windows. Axel didn't sleep in the dog bed. He hadn't even touched it. When the lights in the living room dimmed and Riley rose from the floor, stretching with a yawn, Axel stood as well. He moved like a shadow, silent, alert, always aware of where her feet were, where the walls closed in, where the exits remained. Riley didn't say anything, just gave him a look as she folded the blanket and set it on the back of the couch. A look that said, "You're still safe." But she didn't push it. Neither did Evan. They moved like people who understood grief and trauma and time. Axel wandered the perimeter of the house slowly, nose to baseboard, eyes scanning the dimness. No barking, no cage latches, no disinfectant burned his nose. Only the soft scent of wood polish, laundry detergent, and dust. He found the kitchen and stopped at the edge of the tile. A bowl had been set out, food inside, untouched. He looked around. The room was empty. He stepped forward. His paws barely made a sound as he padded to the bowl. He sniffed it once, then again. Dry kibble, no medication. No surprise scents, just food. Still, he didn't eat. Not right away. Not until he walked to the kitchen door and nosed it gently, closed, then back to the hallway, dark, empty. Only then did he return and eat quickly, without chewing, as if the food might be taken back the moment someone entered. He drank water the same way, short sips, eyes darting to the shadows. And when he finished, he didn't linger. He backed away from the bowls as if they were traps. He found his place in the corner of the hallway. It wasn't intentional, not at first. Just a narrow nook near the linen closet where two walls met at a right angle and the light from the kitchen barely reached. The floor there was cool, familiar, the kind of cold that reminded him of what was real. He could see the bedroom door from there, could hear the bathroom sink run, the creak of Riley's footsteps on the wooden floor, the shuffle of Evan pulling off his boots, and he could see everything else. A sentry post. That's what it became. His own. He curled into himself, not tight, but small, head on his paws. Eyes half-lidded but never fully closed. The hallway creaked once. He flinched. But he didn't run. There was a time years ago when a creak like that meant someone entering a building they weren't supposed to, meant a suspect stepping on a broken branch, meant danger behind a door. But now, it was just wood, old, lived-in wood, and still his body remembered otherwise. From the bedroom, the sound of Riley's voice drifted out, muffled by walls. "You think he's okay?" Evan's reply was quiet. "I think he's still waiting to be sent back." A pause. "Then we won't." Another pause. Then nothing but the soft click of a lamp being turned off. Axel stayed in his corner. He didn't close his eyes until the house had gone still. He didn't shift his body until the hallway floor stopped groaning beneath the wind. And even then, he kept one ear turned toward the sound of breathing down the hall, not ready to join it, but not rejecting it either. It would take more than one night to unlearn the feeling of being temporary, more than food and shelter to erase the muscle memory of being left behind. But he didn't growl. He didn't pace. He watched. And for now, that was his way of staying. In the days that followed, no one told Axel what to do. They didn't rush him, didn't call his name in sing-song tones, didn't clap their hands or dangle treats. They just lived and let him watch. Mornings were simple. Riley would sip coffee at the kitchen table, elbows propped, fingers curled around a chipped ceramic mug. Steam curled from it like a soft invitation. She didn't speak to Axel, not directly, but every now and then she'd slide an apple slice onto the edge of the table, just within reach if he happened to get curious. He never touched them, but he noticed. Evan, on the other hand, spent his early hours out on the porch. Sometimes he worked laptop balanced on his knees, brows furrowed, typing in silence. Sometimes he just sat, gazing out at the trees, the fence, the line where grass met gravel. The porch became Axel's window into the world. He didn't join, but he watched. From the shadows of the hallway, from the corner behind the couch, from a distance that kept him safe. At night, Riley read, not aloud at first, but eventually, one evening when the house had settled into its quiet rhythm, she opened a book and, with her back leaned against the couch, began to speak. Just a sentence, then another. No voice put on, no dramatic flair. Just her own tone, clear, gentle, the way someone might read if they were reading to themselves. Axel didn't respond, but he stayed. She chose stories with dogs in them at first, novels where animals weren't perfect, but loyal, broken, but brave. Not for Axel's benefit, but because maybe, just maybe, she believed he'd understand them in ways she couldn't. He didn't move closer, but his ears flicked when she said the word home. The house breathed at a slow, steady pace. Doors didn't slam. Music didn't blare. No shouting. No sudden laughter. Even the way Riley and Evan moved around each other had a rhythm, quiet footsteps, soft conversations. the occasional low chuckle that dissolved as quickly as it came. For a dog who'd lived years listening for danger, this kind of quiet was foreign and terrifying, because the silence he'd known before meant waiting, waiting for the bark, the siren, the command, the punishment. But this silence was different. This silence allowed. They left doors open. If Axel wanted to watch from the hall, he could. If he wanted to circle the kitchen without entering, no one called him in. When Riley cooked, she let a corner of bread fall near his bowl, never with fanfare, never with encouragement. Just an offering, as if to say, "You're allowed to take up space here." He never ate it in front of her. But it was gone by morning. The leash, still clipped to his collar, was never tugged. In fact, no one even tried to remove it yet, as if they understood the strange comfort of it. The paradox of control as security. Axel didn't fight it. He didn't even notice it anymore. Not really. Each evening, Evan would stand at the sliding door and hold it open, just long enough for Axel to know the choice was there, to step outside, to feel wind on fur. Sometimes Axel would step one paw onto the porch, just one, then back away. Sometimes he'd walk to the doorway and sit, nose to the air, listening to the world beyond the fence. Not once did they force him out. Not once did they say, "Come." One evening, just as the sun sank behind the trees, Riley closed her book, leaned her head back against the couch, and exhaled. Axel was lying in the hallway again, just where the wall met the bookshelf. He hadn't moved in over an hour, but he was awake. She looked in his direction, not at him, not directly, just near, and said softly, like she didn't expect an answer, "You're not a ghost anymore, Axel." Then turned off the light. He didn't understand the words. Not really. But there was something in the tone, something shaped like truth or hope. And in the darkness, for the first time, Axel closed both eyes. Not from exhaustion, but from choice. Progress didn't look like celebration. There was no music, no cheers, no confetti tossed in the air when it happened. Just a sound, a crunch, dry kibble, one piece, then another. That was it. Riley was halfway through drying dishes when she heard it. She didn't stop what she was doing, didn't turn around, just froze for a beat, breath held, and listened. Behind her, across the kitchen, Axel stood over his food bowl. He didn't glance her way, but he wasn't waiting for her to leave. It had been 12 days. 12 days of untouched food, unless the house was empty. 12 days of eating in silence, always alone, always fast. As if meals were tasks, not nourishment. As if he believed, deep down, that accepting kindness made it more likely to be taken away. But tonight, he was eating with Riley standing 6 feet away, a towel in her hands. It wasn't the food that tasted different. It was the air around it. She didn't comment, didn't praise. She dried another plate, set it down. Axel continued eating slowly this time, a steady rhythm, not panicked. When he finished, he turned away from the bowl and quietly lay down near the threshold of the living room, still close to the walls, still guarded, but present. That was new. Later that evening, Evan came in from the porch. He shook the rain off his coat, hung it by the door, and muttered as he passed, "Hey, Axel." Axel didn't jump, didn't hide, but his head turned, just a slight shift, subtle, precise. His ears flicked. He'd heard the name, chosen to acknowledge it. Evan didn't make a big deal of it, just smiled and kept walking, pausing only to glance back once, almost like he wasn't sure if he'd imagined it. But he hadn't. Axel had heard. And what mattered more, he had chosen to respond. These moments stacked like stones in a river, small, barely visible, but underneath they redirected the current. Riley started saying his name more often, not to test him, not to train him, but to give it back to him, as if speaking it aloud could remind him it still belonged to someone, that he still belonged. "Good morning, Axel," she'd say softly when she walked by him in the hallway. Sometimes she'd pause. Wait. He wouldn't move. But once, just once, he blinked in time with her voice. His tail never wagged. Not yet. It stayed still behind him, the way it had for so long it might have forgotten how to lift. But other things moved now. His head, his ears, his attention. Evan began testing a rhythm never commands, never pressure, just patterns. Every evening before stepping outside, he'd call gently, "I'll be on the porch if you need me." At first, Axel didn't respond. But over time, he began to shift his body closer to the sliding glass door, far enough to keep his distance, close enough to see Evan's silhouette beyond the glass, reading or sipping tea under the porch light. Axel wasn't joining, but he was choosing proximity. And sometimes, proximity is trust in disguise. One evening, Riley dropped a small ball by accident. It rolled across the living room floor, stopping a few feet from Axel. He watched it. Didn't flinch, didn't chase, but he watched. And when Riley whispered, "That's okay," and picked it up without reaching near him, Axel exhaled just slightly. They didn't try to change him. They didn't clap when he responded to his name. They didn't praise when he ate in their presence. They let the victories sit quietly, like embers, warming the room without needing to burn. In the stillness of a Tuesday evening, with soft jazz humming from a speaker and rain tapping at the windows, Riley walked past Axel as he lay curled near the bookshelf. She didn't pause. She didn't say a word. But Axel turned his head slowly to follow her as she moved. Not with fear, with recognition. And that, for her, was enough to feel the back of her throat tighten. No one noticed when Axel began sleeping with his body angled toward the center of the room instead of the wall. But he had. Because no one sleeps facing the world unless, at some level, they believe they might survive it. The night was quiet in the way only certain homes can be, where silence isn't emptiness, but a kind of comfort, a shared agreement to rest, to not ask more of each other than necessary. Outside, the trees swayed gently. The rain had stopped some time after dinner, leaving the air still and clean. The porch light cast a low amber glow across the floorboards, and inside the house had settled into its soft routine. Riley sat curled on the end of the couch, a blanket across her knees, a book open but unread in her hands. Her feet were bare, tucked to one side, toes brushing the edge of the rug. She hadn't said Axel's name in over an hour. He lay across the room, where the hardwood met the wall beneath the window. It had become his place, not because anyone told him it was, but because he had chosen it, out of reach, close enough to see, but far enough not to be seen. He lay on his side, eyes half-lidded, ears turned to every sound, not alert, not afraid, just listening. The pages of Riley's book rustled. The house creaked. A clock ticked. And Axel began to move. It wasn't fast. It wasn't even clear at first. Just a shift of weight, a twitch of muscle, a front paw stretched forward, then paused, then the other. He rose slowly, quietly, as if not to disturb the moment, as if part of him still wasn't sure whether he was allowed to be closer. Riley didn't look up, but she felt it. The energy in the room changed, not tense, but charged, like breath held just beneath the surface. Axel crossed the room one step at a time, no leash, no cue, no reason except that something inside him had decided it was time. He didn't go to the couch, didn't push his nose into a hand or place his body across a lap like other dogs might. He simply reached the rug and lay down, not curled up, not guarded. He eased down slowly, body parallel to the edge of the couch, resting his head gently on the rug just inches from Riley's feet. He exhaled, long, soft, and then stilled. Riley didn't move. Not a breath, not a shift, not a word. She knew better. This wasn't about affection. It was about permission, about allowing him to set the pace. She let the moment breathe, let the quiet hold steady. And only after several minutes passed, only after his body had settled, after his breathing had slowed, after the weight in the room had softened, did she do something small. She smiled, not wide, not tearful, just enough to let him know, "I see you, and I'm here." Axel didn't lift his head, but his eyes opened just a little. And for a moment, they met hers. Not searching, not asking, just connecting. Outside, a car passed on the road, its headlights sweeping across the front window for a brief second. Axel didn't flinch. Not this time. The clock ticked on. The book in Riley's lap remained open, unread. Evan, from the hallway, saw the scene as he passed and stopped. He didn't enter, just watched, and then, slowly, quietly, turned off the last of the hallway lights and walked away. Riley reached down, not to touch, not to pet, just to rest her hand lightly on the rug beside her leg. Still, open, an invitation. Axel didn't move toward it, but he didn't pull away either. And in the long, sacred stillness between them, something unspoken passed. Later that night, after the lamps had been dimmed, Riley would whisper to Evan, "He came to me." And Evan would nod, smile faintly and say, "Yeah, I saw." But they wouldn't talk about it more, because some things, the most real things, don't need to be explained. And from that night forward, Axel didn't sleep against the wall. He slept near the rug, always close, never touched, but never alone. The morning was quiet, not the kind of quiet that felt empty, but the kind that wrapped itself around you like warm light through a kitchen window. Axel stood in the living room near the rug where he'd begun sleeping, his body still but alert. His ears tracked the small sounds of the house, the whistle of the kettle, the shuffle of Riley moving down the hall, the creak of wood under Evan's boots by the front door. Nothing startled him anymore. But that didn't mean he'd let his guard down. Not fully. Not yet. Evan crouched slowly beside the coat rack, his movements deliberate, quiet. He didn't call Axel's name, didn't pat his thigh or whistle. He just waited. In his hand, a leash, simple, black, lightly worn at the clip. Axel had seen it once before, on the day they left the shelter. He hadn't worn it since. "Just a walk," Evan said softly, not as a command, but as a courtesy. Then slowly he reached forward, The sound was small, but to Axel it was unmistakable. Click. Axel flinched, just barely. Not enough to move away, but enough for the tension to ripple down his spine like a ghost brushing past his ribs. The leash felt familiar, and that familiarity was complicated. It didn't bring back parks or playtime. It brought back hallways with blood on the tile, handlers yelling over gunfire, the cold metal door of a transport cage swinging open with no warning. But still, he didn't resist. Evan stood and gave the leash the smallest amount of slack enough to offer space, not control. Axel glanced at the door, then back at Evan. He didn't wag, but he moved. They walked in silence down the driveway, gravel crunching under their steps. The air was crisp, edged with the bite of early fall. Leaves stirred across the sidewalk in little spirals, whispering like they had something to say but weren't quite sure how to say it. Axel moved beside Evan, not in heel, not trained, but present. The leash stayed loose between them, a soft thread of trust that neither tugged on. At intersections, Evan paused. Let Axel look. Let him decide. It wasn't obedience they were practicing. It was partnership. By the time they reached the park, the streets had emptied of morning joggers and school buses. Just a few scattered birds, a squirrel darting across a tree root, the wind brushing against the leaves with the rhythm of a lullaby. The park wasn't large, just a grassy field surrounded by oaks and a walking path that circled its edge. There was a playground nearby, quiet now, except for a swing creaking in the breeze. Evan led Axel to the far end of the field, the quietest corner. No people, no barking dogs, just space. He stopped walking. Axel did too. Evan knelt down beside him, looking out over the open space. He didn't remove the leash, not yet. He just waited, letting the moment settle, letting Axel feel it, the freedom, the risk, the echo of something forgotten. Axel stood still, his eyes scanning the field. He didn't pull forward, but he didn't pull back. The leash in Evan's hand hung light, almost like a whisper. "You don't have to run," Evan murmured. "You don't even have to move." Axel blinked slowly. The wind brushed his ears, and though he didn't know the words, something in the tone settled into him. Something said, "This isn't like before. This isn't training. This isn't duty. This is choice." He shifted his weight just slightly forward. His chest rose, fell, rose again, and in the stillness, he made the smallest gesture. He took one step, then another, and Evan let go of the leash. The leash slipped free with a soft click, a sound so quiet it was nearly swallowed by the rustling of leaves, by the wind moving gently through the oak trees that bordered the field. But to Axel, it was louder than thunder. It was the sound of permission, of no more tether, of no more orders, of no more control. And he didn't move. Evan didn't either. He remained kneeling at Axel's side, one hand resting loosely on his own knee, the leash coiled quietly in his palm. He didn't say go, didn't coax with whistles or gesture toward the open grass like a man trying to encourage a fetch. He just waited. Axel stood at the edge of the field like he was standing at the edge of something much bigger than space, memory. The grass in front of him wasn't just a park. It was every abandoned road he'd patrolled, every compound perimeter he'd been trained to circle, every mission that began with open air and ended with the taste of adrenaline in his mouth. The shape of freedom had always looked like this, wide, silent, tempting and dangerous, because freedom always came with a leash behind it, always came with a voice yelling, "Halt!" with a whistle cutting the air sharp enough to hurt, with a gun going off before he reached the end of the run. So Axel stayed still, his legs locked, tail low, head lifted just enough to see every direction. He wasn't scared, he was prepared. The breeze carried scents to him: wet bark, trampled grass, a trail of squirrel musk that curved and faded near the playground. He smelled a dog that had passed earlier that morning, a woman who wore vanilla lotion, the faint trace of oil from a lawnmower. But there were no threats, no shadows shifting behind fences, no sharp edge to the quiet. Still, his paws didn't move. Evan finally sat down on the grass, not close, not facing him, just present. He leaned back on his palms and looked up at the sky like he had nowhere else to be. No expectation, no timeline, just a man in a field with a dog who hadn't yet remembered what it felt like to choose. Axel glanced at him once, that was all, then returned his gaze to the open. The wind blew again, ruffling the fur at his shoulders. The leash was gone, and no one was waiting to put it back on. One step. He thought about it. He leaned forward, almost imperceptibly. A weight shift, but his paw didn't lift. Something in his chest coiled, not from fear of running, but from fear of what might follow if he did, because he'd run before. Through buildings thick with smoke, through alleyways cluttered with broken glass, through brush so tall it tore his ears. But he'd never run for himself. Always after, always toward, always under orders. He turned his head slowly and looked back at Evan. The man was still sitting in the grass, eyes half-lidded, the sun drawing light lines across his face. He wasn't watching Axel. He wasn't waiting. And that made something crack. Not break, just crack. Axel blinked, and for the first time the field in front of him didn't look like a test. It looked like a question. What if you went and no one called you back? He didn't run. He didn't even walk. He just breathed. A deep inhale, a slow exhale. And for now, that was enough. Evan looked over then, just briefly, and said the first and only word of the day. "Whenever you're ready." Then went back to watching the sky. The moment was so small it could have gone unnoticed. A shift of weight, a lean into the wind, a breath that didn't pull back, and then motion. Axel took one step, then another. The first few were slow, deliberate, like a man walking across ice too thin to trust. His paws sank softly into the grass, damp from the morning rain, the scent of wet soil rising around him. No leash tugged, no voice followed, just the wind and the world, and the quiet rhythm of paws pressing into earth not marked by boot prints or blood. Behind him, Evan stayed seated. He didn't call out, didn't cheer, didn't break the spell with praise. Because this wasn't a trick, wasn't a training drill, wasn't something to be rewarded. It was freedom, and freedom didn't need applause. Axel moved farther now, past the oak tree line, past the bench that faced the playground, into the center of the field where grass grew thicker, untamed. His head lifted. His tail still hung low, but no longer tucked. Muscles in his shoulders tightened, stretched, reawakened. He stopped. The wind moved through his fur like fingers, soft, encouraging. And then he did something he hadn't done in over 4 years. He ran. It wasn't elegant. His first stride was awkward, legs uneven, one back paw kicking out wide like he'd forgotten how to pace himself. But the second stride was smoother. And the third? The third was a memory. His body remembered before his mind did. The feeling of ground flying beneath him, the wind rushing past his ears, the instinctive rhythm of chase and joy colliding in motion. His breathing deepened, his legs stretched. No one shouted commands, no one whistled to direct him. No handler's voice pulled him back. He wasn't searching a perimeter. He wasn't pursuing a suspect. He wasn't proving anything to anyone. He was just running, because for the first time in years, he could. Evan watched from the edge of the field, arms resting on his knees, a faint smile in the corners of his mouth, but nothing loud. Nothing to disturb the holiness of it. He didn't take out his phone, didn't film, didn't post. He just let it happen. A run like that didn't belong to anyone but the dog inside it. Axel curved wide around the park's border, a wide arc that kicked up damp leaves in his wake. His paws hit the ground hard now with purpose. His chest rose and fell. His eyes, sharp and lit, scanned the space like they had in the old days, but now there was no threat to track, only sunlight to chase. For a moment, just one, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the puddle by the path. Not the gaunt shadow he'd seen in shelter glass, but a dog in motion, a dog alive. He slowed, not because he was told to, but because he wanted to. His breath came heavy now, tongue slipping past his teeth. His gait shifted back to a walk, ears back, eyes forward. He padded toward Evan, his chest still rising like a drumbeat in retreat. When he reached the man, he didn't sit, didn't lie down. He stood beside him, and for the first time, allowed a hand to brush gently, just briefly behind his ear. "Good boy," Evan said softly. And this time Axel didn't flinch, didn't back away. He closed his eyes, just for a second, and let it land. The light came through the kitchen window like it always did, soft, golden, unhurried. It touched the wooden floorboards first, then stretched across the rug, warming the legs of the chair where Riley sat, coffee cupped in both hands. Steam drifted upward in lazy spirals, dissolving into the hush of the early hour. No alarms, no commands, just breath and quiet. And him. Axel was there before she poured the first drop, not at her feet, not begging, just near. He settled 3 feet away, his self-assigned perimeter. Not too close, not too far. A silent guardian of peace. He still wasn't sure he deserved, but one he was starting to understand. Every morning now, he waited. Waited for the sound of the mug clink on ceramic. Waited for the scent of dark roast that always came before sunrise. Waited not because he was trained to, but because something in him had started to align with the rhythm of this house. Once, the ringing phone had made him bolt to the hallway, heart hammering, claws scrabbling on tile. Now, when it chirped from the countertop, he blinked. That was all. The world no longer crashed down with every sharp sound, because the house held consistency. No raised voices, no barking orders. Just Evan's quiet footsteps upstairs and Riley's soft humming when she thought no one was listening. Axel listened. He always did. He'd come to learn other things too. The difference between the slam of a car door and the thud of a garbage bin. The way Riley's voice changed ever so slightly when she was talking to a child on the phone. The way the house exhaled at exactly 10 a.m. when the heater kicked in, filling the vents with a warm breath that made the floorboards creak and Axel's tail flick once in recognition. Routines weren't chains here. They were promises, small ones, kept daily. Riley glanced at him that morning, her hand still wrapped around the warm mug. She didn't speak. She never forced it. But there was something in her smile, barely there, not even full, that told him she saw it, saw that he was still here, still choosing to stay close, and that small smile was enough. He turned his head and looked toward the hallway out of habit, not anxiety. The front door wasn't a threat anymore. No one burst through it. No one came for him with syringes or leashes or heavy boots. This home was different, not because it was bigger or richer or quieter, but because in every inch of it there was space for him, unspoken, unforced, safe. A bird landed on the window ledge with a sharp flutter. In the past, Axel might have bristled every movement a trigger, but now he simply watched. His ears twitched, but his body didn't flinch. The world had taught him once that safety was a lie. That routine was just the calm before command. That peace was always rented, never owned. But lately, he was starting to wonder. Maybe some peace wasn't bait. Maybe it was just peace. Riley got up slowly to rinse her mug, and Axel followed, not too close, not touching, just shadowing her in a way that had become part of their quiet dance. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She knew he'd be there. Just like he knew that when she reached into the second drawer, right above the spoons, she'd pull out the small biscuit tin and set it on the edge of the counter. She'd break it in half and drop it, no fanfare, no command, and he would eat it, not in a rush, not with fear, just because it was his. Later, Evan would come down the stairs, his hair messy, his shirt half-tucked, and Axel would let him pass without backing away. Not yet tail-wagging, but no longer haunted. That was enough. In the language of dogs, routine was a kind of love. It said, "You're expected. You're known. You're part of this." And in the quiet glow of that morning, on floors that didn't smell like bleach or fear, with coffee steam rising and sunlight crawling across his paws, Axel finally began to believe it. The television was on, but no one was watching. The flicker of soft light moved across the walls, painting fleeting shadows like whispers that never stayed long enough to be feared. Riley sat curled on the far end of the couch, blanket draped across her legs, a worn novel resting open but forgotten in her lap. Outside, the wind murmured through trees, brushing against the windows like a memory asking to be let in. Axel lay on the rug, close, closer than before, not at the hallway's mouth, not beneath the kitchen table, but just within reach. The warmth of the room settled over him like a second skin. Firelight cracked softly behind the grate. It smelled of cedar and something faintly sweet, maybe cinnamon, maybe thyme. He watched Riley. She didn't speak. She didn't look. Not yet. But her hand, slow and deliberate, reached out and patted the couch cushion beside her. Once. Twice. Then it rested still. Axel lifted his head. No command, no leash, no promise, just invitation. The couch. In other lives, furniture was forbidden. Dogs did not climb. Dogs waited. Dogs followed. Even in retirement, rules stuck like burrs in the fur of memory. Axel blinked once. His ears twitched. The pat had not been a test. It had been something else. He pushed himself slowly up, joints cracking from years of concrete and stillness. He stood there, just looking at her, waiting for the gesture to be withdrawn. It wasn't. With one hesitant motion, Axel stepped forward. Then another. Paws touched fabric. The cushion gave beneath his weight, but Riley didn't flinch. She only moved the book to the armrest, folded the blanket back to make space, and said quietly, "It's okay." Axel didn't curl, didn't sprawl. He didn't seek heat, though it was warm. Instead, he sat upright, stiff-backed at first, like a soldier not sure if he'd truly been dismissed. But his body slowly softened, and after a long moment of stillness, he lowered himself until his side rested against her leg. Riley didn't reach for him, not at first. She let him be the one to lean in. Only when he settled did her hand move, fingers open, slow, unhurried, until her palm came to rest over the faint line near his ribs. A scar beneath the fur, faint but deep, old but never forgotten. She didn't rub it. She didn't flinch. She just rested her hand there, the way one might touch the cover of a book they're not ready to read but need to hold anyway. And in the quiet, she whispered, "They trained you to be brave, but no one taught you how to rest." Axel didn't move, but his eyes closed, not fully just the way dogs do when they're not asleep, but not watching for threat either. Half shut, half safe, her hand stayed, not pressing, not petting, just resting over the scar like a promise that pain could be remembered without being relived. And that connection could be formed without needing to erase the past. Outside, the wind picked up, but the walls didn't shake. Inside, the fire popped once, and Riley smiled. She didn't cry. That would come later. For now, it was enough that he stayed, that he chose closeness. Not for warmth, not for food, not because he had to, but because something in him wanted to. Maybe the heart doesn't need to race to prove it's healing. Maybe sometimes all it takes is one dog, one couch, and one hand that waits without demand. The room was dark, save for the amber flicker of the fireplace casting slow-moving shadows along the walls. Outside, the world was still. Inside, time folded inward, quiet, warm, and painfully aware. Axel lay stretched across the couch now, one paw dangling over the edge. His breath was steady, not shallow, not guarded, just real, as if his ribs had finally stopped bracing for impact. Riley hadn't moved in minutes. Her hand still rested gently along his side, right where his fur grew thinner, where scar tissue raised just beneath the surface, like a question never answered. Her fingers drifted, following the ridge of damage. Not the loud kind, not the type that bled in the open, but the kind that left something behind long after the wound had sealed. She whispered, barely audible, "This wasn't just training, was it?" Axel didn't move, but something in his breathing shifted. A pause. A memory brushing too close. She let the silence hold. She didn't rush it. Her thumb traced the line again, softer this time. Her voice, a thread between them. They didn't just teach you how to bite, or run, or sit still under fire. A pause. They taught you how to take pain, and not flinch. Axel blinked once. His tail didn't move. But his eyes weren't guarded now. They were distant-looking, not at her, but somewhere deeper. "They trained you to be quiet," she continued, voice nearly a breath, "to not cry out when it hurt, to not question, to not stop. She could feel her own throat tightening. But she didn't let the emotion rush in and drown the moment. He took a bullet for someone, Evan had told her once, reading off a crumpled report. Handler lived. Dog didn't recover right. Riley looked down at Axel's chest, the rise and fall of it, the soft sigh he gave. He trusted them, she said. And when it was over, they didn't come back for him. Her voice cracked, barely. But Axel didn't react. Not like before. He didn't shrink, didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted. Just enough. His head moved, resting a little closer to her side. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater, embarrassed by tears he couldn't judge, and then, more to herself than to him, "You were trained to break, so they could build something useful." Her hand returned to his ribs, but they forgot to fix what mattered when they were done. The fire crackled once sharp, like a snapped twig in an empty field. Axel didn't startle. Not anymore. The days of twitching at every sound, of bolting from creaks in the floor, those were fading. Not erased, but fading, like bruises under fur, healing where no one could see. Riley leaned back into the cushion and exhaled. She didn't have the right words to undo years of obedience, of cold steel and colder orders. But maybe she didn't need the right words. Maybe just showing up was enough. "You don't have to prove anything anymore," she whispered. Axel blinked slowly, then without warning his nose nudged the inside of her wrist. Soft. Barely a second. But it was the first time he'd done it. Riley let the tears fall this time. She didn't hide them. Because that, too, was part of healing, letting what hurt be seen, letting silence speak without shame. And as the fire burned lower and the night deepened, Axel shifted again, this time curling gently, along the curve of her side. His scar lay beneath her hand. But his heart was somewhere closer now. It began with a flicker, just a soft pulse of light behind the clouds. Then came the rumble. Not loud, not sudden, just low and long enough to vibrate the glass in its frame. Axel was already up before the second one hit. No bark, no growl, only movement, silent, precise, too practiced. By the time Riley looked up from her book, she saw his tail vanish around the hallway corner. Another crack of thunder rolled through the sky. This time sharper, closer. The house seemed to inhale. And then the rain came. She found him in the laundry room, door half open, no lights on, the machine unplugged, the room cool and quiet. He had wedged himself between the dryer and the wall back pressed against plaster, eyes wide and fixed on something that wasn't there. Or maybe something that had always been there. He was shivering. Not violently, not dramatically, but the kind of tremble that starts deep below bone, below breath. Riley didn't say his name. She didn't reach for him. She simply sat down on the other side of the room, back against the opposite wall, bare feet on the cool tile. And silence, thick as wool between them. There was no need for a voice, not in this space. Because whatever he was seeing, it wasn't her. It wasn't the house. It wasn't now. Another crack, closer this time. Axel's ears flattened. His body flinched, then coiled tighter. He didn't make a sound, didn't whimper, didn't yelp, but his chest rose too fast. His breath stuttered like a machine gone wrong. Riley's eyes stayed soft, not pitiful, just present. She knew enough not to speak comfort like a spell. You couldn't reason fear out of someone who had been trained to fear nothing and yet had learned to fear everything. The laundry room smelled of dryer sheets and old detergent. But under it all, beneath plastic lids and folded towels, there was a weight that made the air feel thick. It wasn't the storm outside. It was the one inside him. Time passed without clocking itself. Rain battered the roof like footsteps too familiar. Wind groaned against the siding. And then, something in Axel's body gave way. A breath, deep, broken, and he lowered his head to the floor, not in defeat, in surrender, not to fear, but to the moment. Riley didn't move. Her legs had gone numb, but she didn't dare shift. She knew how fragile this was, this quiet, this in-between, this trust unsaid, unwritten, but alive. Lightning flashed again, casting their shadows along the wall. Axel's eyes blinked against the brief light. He looked not directly at her, but toward her. A muscle in his jaw flexed, then stilled, and slowly, painfully, he rested his head on his paws. The shaking hadn't stopped, but the running had. Riley exhaled through her nose, slow and quiet. Her fingers ached to reach for him, but she didn't, not yet. Instead, she whispered into the dark, "I'm here." 3 words, not magic, but anchor. She leaned her head back against the wall and let the storm pass, outside and around them. And Axel didn't vanish this time. He stayed, right there, trembling, still breathing, but there. And for tonight that was enough. The box was taped shut, then retaped, yellowed at the corners, its edges frayed from time, from hands that couldn't quite throw it away but couldn't face it either. Evan had found it in the storage shed, buried beneath a stack of dusty uniforms, a cracked mug that once read "K9 Strong," and an old leash still looped as if waiting to be clipped on again. He hadn't opened it for years, not since they told him Axel had been rehomed, not since he stopped believing that word meant anything other than forgotten. But now, Axel was here, sleeping on the rug just a few feet away, whole but not untouched, alive but not unscarred. Evan sat on the edge of the couch, the box beside him. Riley folded a blanket nearby, watching him, not pushing, just there. He peeled back the lid, a faint smell of cedar and something older like wax or paper that had held grief too long. Inside were the remnants of a man who had tried to move on and failed. Among the items, a photo. Axel in uniform, standing proud beside a younger Evan, a collar tag etched with a badge number, and then an envelope, sealed, unmarked, except for one word on the front: "Forgive." Evan's hands stilled. He knew the handwriting, knew it in his bones. He passed it to Riley without a word. She took it gently, like something alive. And as Axel shifted in his sleep, one paw twitching, Riley opened it. The paper inside was creased, soft from time. The ink had bled slightly at the edges. And then she began to read. "To whoever finds this, maybe Evan, maybe someone else. His name is Axel. You know that. But you don't know what he carried for me. He saved my life. Not in the way people say when they talk about dogs doing tricks. I mean really. On a day when we were surrounded, when I froze, when I couldn't lift my weapon, Axel didn't wait. He moved. He took the hit meant for me. And I lived because he didn't hesitate." Riley's voice faltered. She looked up, her eyes meeting Evan's for a moment. He nodded for her to continue. I asked to keep him, fought for it, but the department said he was too damaged, unfit for home, not adoptable. Said he would be sent for rehab, reassignment, or containment. I signed the papers because I didn't know what else to do. I thought they'd place him somewhere good. I believed them. I shouldn't have. Axel stirred now, ears twitching, not awake but not lost in sleep either, as if somewhere inside he remembered these words. I've looked for him, off and on, never knew where he ended up. But if you have this letter, then maybe, somehow, he found a home. If he's with you, please tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I never stopped thinking about that day. Not because of the bullet, but because I left him behind. He gave me everything, and I wasn't brave enough to fight harder for him. Forgive me. Please. J. Torres. The room was quiet when Riley finished. The rain had stopped. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. And then Axel lifted his head, just slightly, and looked at them. Not scared, not expectant, just watching, listening, present. Evan reached forward, gently resting the photo of their younger selves beside Axel's paw. No words, just breath, just memory, just a bridge that had finally begun to mend. That night, Riley placed the letter in a small frame and set it beside Axel's bed. Not as a shrine, not as a monument, but as proof. He was never broken, only waiting to be seen again. The letter sat in a simple wooden frame, no glass, no embellishment, just enough to hold it steady against the quiet that followed. Riley placed it gently on the floor beside Axel's bed. Not on a shelf, not high out of reach, right there, where his eyes could find it if they ever chose to. She sat cross-legged nearby, knees folded under a blanket, her fingers still stained faintly with ink from where she'd handled the paper too long. Her voice had not spoken since the words from Torres faded into silence, but her presence filled the room with something stronger than sound. She looked at Axel, not expecting anything, not asking for it. And then, softly, barely more than breath, she said, "You were never broken." Axel didn't move. He remained curled on the blanket they'd given him weeks ago, an old throw with a stitched tear and faint scent of lavender, now more his than theirs. His eyes stayed open, slow blinking, but something in his body loosened, subtly, like a thread unwinding from a knot too tight for years. Evan passed by the doorway a moment later. He didn't enter, just paused, hand resting on the frame. Axel turned his head and looked at him, not with alarm, not with submission, just presence, and then turned back to the letter. His breathing deepened, not shallow like in the shelter, not strained like after nightmares. This was different, from the ribs, not the throat. Long exhales, weight released. The hours passed. Rain tapped the windows again, light and steady this time. No thunder, no flashes, just the rhythm of a world returning to peace. Somewhere down the hall the clock struck midnight. Riley stirred, rising slowly from the floor. Her knees creaked. She smiled at the sound life reminding her that healing wasn't only for dogs. She turned back to check on him one last time before heading to bed, and then stopped. Axel had shifted. His body had rolled, not completely, not deliberately, but enough that his chest now faced the ceiling, his legs splayed just slightly apart, his neck vulnerable, his belly exposed. It was nothing dramatic, no ceremonial act, just instinct, unspoken, uncoiled, but to Riley it was everything. to a dog like Axel, who had spent years sleeping with his back to the wall, ears tuned to every footstep, heart braced for the next command or punishment. This was surrender, not out of defeat, but out of safety, out of belief that the hand would not strike, that the voices would not bark orders, that the world, at least within these walls, would not demand anything more of him than to simply be. She didn't approach, didn't whisper his name. She just stood in the doorway, hand pressed gently to her chest, feeling her own heartbeat, because trust, when it comes back, doesn't shout. It curls its body in the quiet. It sleeps on its back beneath firelight and letter-framed apologies, and it breathes deep and slow, and finally free. Outside, the wind carried the smell of wet grass and blooming honeysuckle. The porch light hummed, and in the soft halo of it all, beneath a roof no longer foreign, beside a letter once soaked in guilt, Axel dreamed, not of orders, not of noise, but of soft hands and morning sun, and the slow miracle of being seen again. The night was still, too still. A blanket of low fog clung to the ground behind the backyard fence, silvered by the moon, but unmoving, as if the world had paused, holding its breath. Inside, Riley had just turned off the kitchen light. Her hand lingered on the switch a second longer than usual. She didn't know why. Evan was brushing his teeth upstairs. The hallway floor creaked above. Axel lay in his usual spot near the sliding glass door, head on his paws, one ear tilted lazily toward the sound of crickets. A quiet dog these days. A dog of few movements. He had learned the rhythm of this house, learned which sounds meant comfort and which ones didn't matter. But tonight, something shifted. A scent, a presence, a tension in the air that didn't belong. Axel's head lifted. He didn't move yet. He just listened. The wind had changed, carried something faint, oily, bitter. Not smoke, not prey. Intent. The hairs along his spine rose, and then he saw it. Just beyond the fence, between the slats movement, a shadow. Human height, not approaching, just standing, watching. Axel rose in a single fluid motion, no hesitation. No fear. His body aligned like it had during training, strong, alert, poised. He stepped closer to the glass. His breath fogged the pain as he peered out. The figure was still there, wrong, too still, like it wanted to be seen and not. And then, without waiting, without checking for permission, without the fear that had ruled him for years, Axel barked. A deep, sharp, visceral sound that shattered the silence like a dropped glass. It echoed through the house, cutting through every wall, every memory of stillness. Riley spun around from the hallway. "Axel?" But Axel didn't look at her. He stood like a sentinel, shoulders squared, body between the house and whatever waited beyond that fence. He barked again, then again. Upstairs, Evan nearly dropped the cup he was rinsing. He hadn't heard that sound, not from Axel. Not once. Not since the shelter. Not since the field. Not even in dreams. He bolted down the stairs. "What is it? What's wrong?" Axel didn't look away. Evan followed his gaze. The backyard, the fence, the shadow, a man, tall, still, watching them. Then, as quickly as he appeared, the figure moved. Fast, too fast. Evan threw open the door and stepped out into the cold. "Hey!" But the man was already gone, swallowed by fog, feet silent on the wet ground. Evan scanned the perimeter, eyes adjusting to the dark. Nothing. He waited, listened. Only the wind, only the leaves, only the faint echo of Axel's final bark, still hanging in the air like smoke. When he stepped back inside, Riley was standing near Axel. She hadn't touched him, but she stood close. And Axel had turned to her, slowly. Not frantic, not afraid, certain. His breathing had steadied, but his eyes were still sharp, as if to say, "I saw what you didn't. I still know how to protect." Riley reached down, hand hovering just above his head. "Good boy," she whispered, not as praise, but as recognition, as truth. Later that night, after they checked every door, every window, and Evan reinforced the lock on the back gate, Axel returned to his place by the glass. He didn't lie down. He sat, watching, his body relaxed, but his eyes never left the night. And this time, when the wind passed through the trees, he didn't flinch. He was listening, ready, awake. He hadn't barked in 4 years. Not when the lights flickered in the shelter. Not when strangers passed. Not even when another dog lunged near his cage. But tonight? Tonight, he remembered. And his bark, sharp, true, and without fear, was not just warning. It was a vow, a line drawn. A voice returned. Dust drifted in the afternoon light like soft ash as Evan pulled down the attic ladder. The wood creaked beneath his weight. He hadn't climbed into that space in years. The insulation still held the scent of cedar and forgotten summers. Boxes stacked in corners, lids half collapsed from moisture and time. Old boots. College notebooks, a baseball glove with one cracked leather strap. And there, folded under a tarp that smelled faintly of dog hair and liniment, lay the vest. Dark navy, faded Velcro patches still clung to the edges, though the words were long gone. One tag near the shoulder remained intact. K-9 Unit. Property of E. Kavanaugh. Evan held it like an old memory, not a costume, not nostalgia, but something heavier, weightier. He didn't say a word. Downstairs, Axel lay by the doorway, still alert from the night before. Something in him hadn't settled, not since the man at the fence. He watched the windows more now. His movements held a practiced caution again, nothing frantic, just a return to readiness. But when Evan stepped down from the attic, vest in hand, Axel's ears twitched. Then he sat up. Not fully, just enough to acknowledge the moment. Evan walked slowly toward him. The vest hung over his forearm. No commands, no words. He stopped 2 feet in front of Axel and knelt. He held the vest forward, not in offering, but in invitation. Axel's nose twitched, catching the scent before the fabric even reached him. Old smells stirred, sweat, rain, fear, gunpowder. A dog that wasn't him. And home. Axel leaned forward and sniffed. Long, careful, reverent. He didn't paw it, didn't chew. He nosed it gently, like recognizing a scar not on flesh, but on time. And then he sat. Not abruptly, not like a trick, but as if placing himself back into a role only his bones remembered, spine straight, eyes forward, a posture not taught but lived. Evan didn't move. The silence between them wasn't empty. It pulsed. With memory, with loss, with something wordless that passed only between men and dogs who've been to places others wouldn't understand. "I haven't worn this since," Evan began, but let the sentence die. He set the vest down beside Axel, letting the fabric rest against the floor like a flag no longer in battle. "You don't have to go back," he said. But I think part of you already did." Axel didn't flinch. He just looked at him. And Evan, without even realizing, felt his hand rise to salute. Not to the vest, not to the badge it once carried, but to the dog who sat beside it, unclaimed by duty, but not forgotten by it. Later, Riley found them like that man and dog, seated in shared silence, the vest between them. No drama, no fanfare, just remembrance and recognition. That night, Evan didn't hang the vest in the closet. He left it folded at the foot of Axel's bed, not because he expected anything, but because some uniforms aren't meant to be worn again, only remembered. And some warriors, four-legged or not, don't need permission to stand watch again. They just do. By sunrise, Riley was already at the hardware store. She didn't tell Evan what to buy. She just walked the aisles with quiet focus, selecting reinforced deadbolts, a motion light, 2 packs of security screws, and a roll of weather-treated fencing wire. They didn't talk much on the way home. They didn't need to. The night had spoken loud enough. Evan worked silently through the morning. The fence rattled under his weight as he tightened every board. He added height, doubled the latches, checked for soft ground beneath the posts. It was the kind of work he hadn't done in years, the kind that required his hands, not his words. Axel watched from the porch, ears forward, body still. Not tense, not fearful, just aware. Inside, Riley replaced the lock on the back door. The old one had worked fine, but fine no longer felt like enough. As she screwed the last bolt into the frame, she looked toward the window where Axel had first barked. The glass still held the faint outline of his breath from that night. She left it there. By noon, the upgrades were done. Nothing fancy, no cameras, no alarms. Just something better than before. But that wasn't what mattered. Later that afternoon, Evan crouched in the backyard, wiping sawdust from his palms. He looked up at Axel, who hadn't moved from the porch steps since he began. "You saw him first," Evan said, voice low. "You felt him before I even got to the door." Axel blinked slowly. The wind tugged gently at the grass, carrying with it the faint smell of the vest still folded near his bed. Evan exhaled. "You were watching out for us." He meant it. Every word. Inside, Riley filled a bowl with fresh water and warmed up leftover chicken. No commands, no whistles, no baby talk. She placed the bowl near the living room rug, closer than she normally would, and stepped back. Axel didn't hesitate. He didn't rush either. He simply rose, walked over, and ate, not mechanically like in the shelter, not guarded like the first weeks. Just as if he belonged there. When he finished, Riley crouched nearby, resting her arms on her knees. She didn't reach out. Instead, she spoke, gentle, matter of fact. "You still have it," she said. Axel tilted his head slightly. She smiled. "The instinct, the timing, the choice to protect." And then, softer, "Whatever they did to you didn't take that away." Evan stepped in from the porch, wiping sweat from his brow. "He didn't just alert," he said, nodding toward Axel. "He waited. Let me see him before he charged. That's discipline." Riley nodded. "That's training, but also trust." They looked at each other for a beat. Then Evan walked over, knelt down, and for the first time placed his palm gently on Axel's shoulder. "Thank you," he said. Axel didn't flinch, didn't brace, didn't move, just stood there, accepting it, not as praise, but as truth. Later that evening, The house felt a little different, not just safer, but aligned, as if something had clicked back into place, not in the walls, but in the space between them, in the rhythm of quiet steps, slow breathing, and a dog who now stood not at the edge of the room, but right in the center. That night, Riley lit a candle on the kitchen table, lavender and cedar. She didn't say why. She didn't need to. The flame flickered gently alive, but calm. And on the floor nearby, Axel curled not beside the door, not against a wall, but in full view like a guardian who no longer needed to hide. In the home they were building together, one lock, one bowl, one bark at a time. He was no longer the one being protected. He was part of the protection. And that made all the difference. The lake shimmered like glass that afternoon, still, gentle, fringed with wild reeds that bent softly in the breeze. The kind of place where time forgot to rush and memories felt closer to the surface than usual. Axel stood at the edge of the water, his paws half in, half out, watching ripples stretch outward from where a stone had just plunked in. A little boy squealed, "Do it again! Throw it farther!" Another voice, older, laughed behind him. "Bet he can swim faster than you, Timmy." "No way," the boy said, gripping a tennis ball with muddy fingers. He turned to Axel, lifted the ball high, and, just like that, threw it with all the strength his 5-year-old frame could muster. It arced like a clumsy comet, splashing awkwardly 10 feet from shore. Axel didn't charge, not right away. He looked first to Riley. She was seated on a faded picnic blanket nearby, knees pulled to her chest, arms draped loosely over them. She met his gaze and gave the smallest nod. It was all he needed. Then he ran. His body, older now, with scars mapped like old trails, still remembered the rhythm. Water splashed around his legs as he moved, then up past his chest, then finally over his shoulders. He cut through the water like a dark blur beneath sun-flecked waves. Timmy bounced in place, laughing with a noise that didn't belong to anything but childhood. Axel returned with the ball, his jaws careful not to crush it. He dropped it at the boy's feet, gave a single huff of air, and stood waiting. "You want to go again?" Timmy asked. Axel blinked slowly, then wagged his tail. Not wild, not frantic, just enough. More children had gathered now, some from neighboring families who'd come to the lake, others who knew Axel from short walks past the house. One by one, they took turns tossing the ball, some short, some awkward, some so far they had to shout to get him to chase. And every time, Axel did. He didn't bark, didn't jump. He fetched, and returned, and waited. The way only a dog who used to follow orders out of duty could now do so out of joy. Then the toddler arrived. She was maybe 2 years old, wobbly legs, wild hair, eyes like puddles before rain. She toddled toward Axel with zero fear and all the confidence of a child who had never yet been betrayed. And before Riley could move, before Evan, halfway through a sandwich, could set it down, she reached out and tugged Axel's ear. Not hard, but not gentle either. Silence. A breath held across the grass. Riley stood halfway from her blanket now, knees ready to move, voice caught in her throat. But Axel didn't growl. He didn't flinch. He didn't move away. He turned slowly and pressed his nose gently against the girl's hand, then sat. The toddler squealed in delight and collapsed onto his front leg like he was a beanbag made just for her. Her tiny hands patted his fur in chaotic, uncoordinated rhythms. Riley watched, eyes burning. Evan stood behind her now, arms crossed loosely, saying nothing, but closer than he needed to be. "He let her," Riley whispered, voice tight with wonder. "He let her do that." "Yeah," Evan said softly. "He's not afraid anymore." Riley wiped at her cheek and sat back down, folding herself small, as if trying to hold the moment inside her body. There had been so many years of bars and commands and loud voices, so many days Axel had known only cold concrete and scheduled meals. Now? Now he was a pillow for a baby who didn't know the meaning of trauma, and didn't have to, because of him. As the sun dipped lower, the lake turned gold, then amber, then the kind of dusky blue that made everything feel quieter. The children's laughter gave way to the hum of distant cicadas and the soft slosh of water at the shore. Axel lay on the grass, eyes half-lidded, head resting between his paws. Riley watched him from the blanket, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the fabric. "You're not who they said you were," she murmured, mostly to herself. "You never were." And Axel, still, calm, complete, just let the breeze move through his fur. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon oil and sawdust. Evan stood on a step stool near the end of the corridor, a small brass hammer in one hand, the other bracing the edge of the frame. He moved carefully, not because the frame was fragile, but because what it meant was. Inside the wooden border were two photos side by side. On the left, Axel, in uniform. The photo was old but crisp. His black and tan coat gleamed beneath the canine vest. His ears were sharp. His stance alert, still, perfectly symmetrical, looked like a statue carved from obedience and discipline. There was something proud in his posture, something etched into him from years of command and purpose. The badge on his collar shimmered under sunlight caught mid-glint. On the right, Axel again, but different. Taken just a few weeks prior, in the same open field where Evan had once unclipped the leash and said nothing. Axel was in mid-run, ears back, mouth slightly open, tongue loose in a way that said, "Not for duty, just because." His paws barely touched the ground. Behind him the field blurred in golden light, a blur of boyish freedom. 2 lives, same dog. Evan gently tapped the final nail into place. He stepped down, tucked the hammer into the toolbox at his feet, and looked at his work from a distance. Riley approached behind him, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes caught the inscription beneath the images. From duty to family. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand reached out, tracing the carved letters with her thumb. Axel wandered in from the living room a moment later, tail flicking lazily side to side. He stopped near Evan's leg, tilted his head, and looked up at the wall. It wasn't clear what he recognized, if he saw himself in either photo. Dogs saw differently, remembered differently. But something in his posture shifted. He sat, then slowly, almost thoughtfully, lowered himself onto his side. His body pressed against the cool hallway floor. One paw extended across the baseboard. His breathing slowed, deepened, as if he understood. As if, in some deep layer of memory, he felt the connection between who he had been and who he was now. Evan crouched beside him, resting one hand just behind his neck. "You were a soldier," he said quietly. "And you still are." Riley smiled. "But now, you don't have to earn love. You just have it." Axel blinked once, slow and content. The hallway light flickered slightly as the sun shifted outside. Somewhere, a clock ticked. Time moved forward. Later that night, when the hallway light was dimmed and the scent of chamomile tea hung gently in the kitchen, Riley passed by the photo frame one last time before bed. She stopped, looked again, and whispered, not to Evan, not to Axel, but to the space between the frames. "You found your way home." And beneath those words, a dog rested quietly in the next room, not guarding, not listening for commands, just breathing deeply and safely into the silence of belonging. Outside, the snow fell in slow, deliberate spirals, like nature had nowhere else to be. It layered the backyard fence, softened the old maple tree, and turned the world beyond the window into a blur of white hush. There were no car sounds, no barking, just the muffled stillness of a winter evening that didn't ask for attention, only presence. Inside, the fire crackled gently in the hearth. The living room was wrapped in its own kind of warmth, not just from the flame, but from the quiet rituals of a home that had settled into itself. Riley curled her legs beneath a knit blanket, a mug of tea untouched on the side table. Evan leaned back into the opposite corner of the couch, fingers lightly tapping his jeans, not out of restlessness, but rhythm, the kind that fills space when words are too small. And between them, Axel. The German shepherd was not at the edge of the rug anymore, not lying beside the couch, not curled in a hallway corner. He was here. Half his body rested against Riley's shin. The other pressed gently along Evan's boot. His chest rose and fell in a rhythm not taught in training, a rhythm of safety, of trust, of sleep without fear. One ear flicked with the sound of a popping log, but he didn't lift his head, didn't scan the room, didn't brace. Riley reached out, not to pet, but to rest her hand lightly on his back. Her palm rose and fell with each of Axel's breaths. "Do you remember the first night?" she whispered, barely above the fire's hum. Evan didn't reply. He didn't have to. They both remembered. How Axel wouldn't come near the couch. Wouldn't eat if anyone watched, wouldn't lie belly up, wouldn't bark, wouldn't believe. Now here he was, sound asleep between them, a soldier at rest, a survivor without armor, a dog once shaped by commands, now softened by silence. Riley's eyes moved to the mantel. The photo frame still sat where Evan had hung it that morning. From duty to family. She looked down again, at the way Axel's body curved into the crook of the couch, as if he belonged to it, as if the furniture itself had been waiting years for this exact wait. A new log shifted in the fire. Flames licked the stone with a sibilant sigh. Axel's ear twitched again, but he didn't wake. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering old tracks, silencing old echoes. And inside, the silence was full, not empty. It held things. Laughter not yet spoken, grief long past, memories that didn't need explanation, trust that hadn't been forced, only offered. In that room, in that moment, under firelight and snowlight, a dog slept between two people who didn't rescue him, but waited for him to return to himself. And that was the real rescue. The hall was small. An old VFW lodge on the edge of town, tucked between a used bookstore and a shuttered diner. the kind of place with wooden paneling that had soaked up decades of stories, laughter, and grief. Outside, a spring breeze carried the scent of grass just beginning to green again. Inside, silence fell as the door opened. Evan stepped in first. Axel followed. No leash, no command, just a quiet understanding. The old wooden floor creaked beneath their steps as rows of heads turned, gray-haired veterans, former K-9 handlers, a scattering of young faces holding framed photos of dogs long past. There were medals here, but none freshly shined, no rank to impress, only memory. The announcer didn't use a microphone. He didn't need to. "Today," he said, "we welcome back one who served, one who waited, one who still stands." Axel paused beside Evan's leg. His posture was straight, ears forward, not from training, but from something older, something deeper, a sense of presence, of returning. The man stepped forward, holding a small box in both hands. The medal inside wasn't standard issue. It bore no rank, no department insignia, just one word engraved into the back: endure. 4 years in silence, the announcer continued. 4 years forgotten by the system that trained him, deployed him, and then shelved him. A ripple moved through the room, not noise, but memory. So many here knew what that felt like, to be useful until you weren't, to be honored until you aged, to be remembered only if someone insisted on it. And yet, the announcer nodded toward Axel. He did not break. He waited. As Evan knelt, the medal was gently fastened to Axel's collar. It wasn't heavy, but somehow it seemed to anchor the moment. And then, softly, almost imperceptibly, Axel bowed his head. The entire room stood, hands over hearts, hats removed, silence, deep, respectful, earned. In the back row, a young girl barely 7 stood on tiptoe beside her grandfather. She raised her hand to her brow in a perfect salute. Her eyes shimmered. Axel looked at her, not with command, but calm. And she smiled like she understood something words couldn't hold. Later, outside, as the gathering thinned and conversations drifted into the wind, Evan stood with Axel beside the flagpole. The medal caught the sunlight and gleamed, just for a second, like a tear before it falls. "He didn't bark," someone said nearby. "He didn't have to," another replied. "He's already said everything." That night, Evan tucked the citation into a small wooden frame and placed it beside their fireplace. But the medal, that stayed on Axel's collar, not as proof of service, but as reminder. He had endured, and he had come home. The sky outside had turned the color of cooling embers, muted orange, fading into soft blue. Through the window, the wind stirred the last few petals from the blooming magnolia tree, sending them drifting across the porch like slow-falling memories. Inside, the house was quiet, not the silence of emptiness, but the stillness of something complete. Evan stood by the door, keys still in hand, watching as Axel padded slowly across the floor. His steps were steady, but no longer sharp. No tension in the shoulders, no readiness in the tail, only calm. The medal from the ceremony still rested against his fur. It didn't clink, it didn't flash. It just was, like it belonged. Evan crouched beside him, fingers brushing gently over the space behind Axel's ear, the place he had once flinched from. But now, Axel leaned in. Just slightly. Just enough. No words had been spoken since the truck ride home. No words were needed. But then, in a voice softer than command, steadier than ritual, Evan whispered the only order that still mattered. "Off duty, boy." Axel paused, not from confusion but from understanding, the kind that ran deeper than obedience, the kind that lived beneath scars and drills and long nights under floodlights. This was not a cue to rest. It was permission, a lifetime of responding to tone, to urgency, to mission, had built a reflex in him. But this was different. He turned his head toward the living room, then padded forward, past the fireplace, past the photo frame Evan had hung the week before. One picture of a lean, armored dog in full tactical gear. The other of that same dog mid-run, ears flying back, tongue out, wild with life. Axel stopped beside his bed. But this time he didn't lower himself slowly, warily. He curled into it, body unguarded, legs stretched, chest rising and falling in quiet rhythm. A soft sigh left him, the kind that only comes when everything once clenched has finally let go. Evan watched him from across the room. There was something caught behind his ribs, not grief, not pride, just something heavy with meaning, the kind you carry, not speak. Riley walked in with a blanket folded over her arm. She didn't need to ask anything. "He's off duty," Evan said simply. She smiled. Not at Evan, but at the dog who had waited 4 years behind metal and noise to hear those words. Then she knelt, not to pet, not to praise, just to be close. She laid the blanket down near his bed, not on him, not over him, just near, in case he wanted it. Axel didn't move. His eyes blinked once, then closed. The fire crackled in the hearth. No commands, no leashes, no noise, just peace. The morning light filtered through gauzy curtains, casting soft stripes across the hardwood floor. A mug of chamomile tea sat steaming on the table, untouched. Riley leaned over her desk, pen in hand, her handwriting careful but warm. The page before her bore only a few lines, yet each word carried the weight of intention. To whom it may concern. My name is Riley Mercer. My husband and I would like to foster again. If possible, we'd love to welcome a senior dog, one who's been overlooked. She paused, the pen hovering. Her eyes drifted sideways toward the rug by the window. Axel lay there, head resting on his front paws, eyes half-lidded with age but still alive with something deep and knowing. The scar on his side had faded to a mere whisper beneath his fur. His badge lay stored in a keepsake box now, not forgotten, just honored differently. He wasn't asleep. Not really. Just resting in that way old souls do. Fully present. Fully listening. When Riley's pen moved again, so did his eyes. Tracking her, not out of worry, not command, just recognition. We understand the needs of older dogs, she wrote, the words slower now. We have room, not just in our home, but in our hearts. A breeze stirred the curtains. The house smelled faintly of lavender and dog shampoo, and something faintly toasted from breakfast. Evan was on the porch, humming out of tune as he sanded an old bench. Life had resumed, not as it once was, but as it had become, steady, whole. Riley signed the letter, folded it gently, and slid it into an envelope. She didn't seal it right away. Instead, she rose and walked over to Axel. He didn't move at first, just blinked once. But when she knelt and laid the envelope down beside his paw, his tail lifted slightly off the ground and thumped once, a slow, deliberate beat against the floor. And that was all, but it was everything. Riley smiled, not the wide, camera-ready smile of announcements or pride. No. This was smaller, softer, the kind that broke you and stitched you back together in the same breath. "You knew," she said quietly, reaching out to stroke behind his ear. "You always knew." Axel didn't look up, but his chest rose and fell with a calmness she hadn't seen even months ago. The kind that comes only when a mission one not ordered, not assigned, but chosen is complete. "Your story," she whispered, "is going to make room for someone else's." Outside, a child laughed down the street. A bike bell rang. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, not warning, not fear, just living. Evan leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, a small streak of sawdust on his jeans. "Letter ready?" he asked. Riley nodded. "Almost." She stood, looked once more at Axel. "He's ready," she added. "And so are we." Evan didn't say anything right away, but his gaze lingered on the envelope beside Axel's paw, then on the old dog himself. "That tail thump," he murmured. "It's like he gave us his blessing." Riley smiled through the quiet warmth rising in her chest. Maybe he did. As she sealed the envelope, Axel's eyes closed. Not from exhaustion, not to shut the world out, but in peace, in trust, and somewhere in the spaces between the bark of a protector and the sigh of a retiree was a truth both Riley and Evan understood deeply now. That some dogs are sent not just to guard, not just to serve, but to teach us how to start again. And when they do, they make room for the next. In a world that often overlooks the quiet, weathered souls who've given everything they wait, behind sheltered doors, beneath old scars, inside tired eyes. But every once in a while someone sees past the years, the wounds, the silence, and chooses love anyway. Axel's story isn't just about a dog who found a home, it's about redemption. About the courage it takes to trust again, to run without orders, to sleep without fear. And more than anything, it's about the healing power of patience, compassion, and second chances. German shepherds like Axel aren't just protectors, they're teachers. They show us what loyalty means even when the world forgets you. They remind us that worth isn't measured in years or tricks or medals, but in the quiet way they stay by your side, even when words aren't spoken. So maybe the next time you walk past a kennel and see a graying muzzle and tired eyes, remember Axel. Remember that behind that stillness is a heart waiting to beat for someone again. Because sometimes the ones who need love most are the ones who have the most to give. And when we open our homes to them, we don't just change their lives, they change ours.